All right, folks, again, welcome. Really glad you're here tonight, and thank you for spending part of your evening with us, especially with all that's going on. It means a lot that you're wanting to come here and have a little time and hopefully get some more tips and tricks as we go. And so, going to jump in, and just to remind you, we started with this idea, or I did, and my co-host, Dr. Lopez, will introduce herself. I'm Scott Cypers, the director of the anxiety programs at the Helen and Arthur E. Johnson Depression Center. And last time kind of presented this model of how to stay smart during the COVID crisis that we're dealing with. And today, going to highlight a couple of those things from the model and do a deeper dive and continue to kind of do a deeper dive. And the first thing I kind of want to start with is this notion that we're all kind of going through the worst marathon ever. And if you think about it, you've now been thrown into a marathon that you didn't get any time to prepare for. You have no known finish line. You can't quit. And you have to do it socially distant from each other with no support and no one necessarily giving you Gatorade on the way to make it more manageable. Oh, and oh, yeah, running the marathon and you can't quit, some people might get really sick in the marathon and maybe pass away. And if you think about that, who would ever want to run a marathon like that? And yet here we are finding ourselves right in the middle, or not in the middle of the marathon, but we're in a marathon. And that's the first thing I wanted to talk to you and remind you is that this is a marathon. And it's a hard marathon for all the reasons I named. And the first thing to think about as we go through, where are we in the race? And it's hard because part of where we are or we don't know the end line. So you don't know when the race is going to be over. So we really have to set a manageable pace. But what we have heard, what people are telling us, is that we're more in the beginning of the marathon and we're about to hit the hard pace where you can't necessarily see the start line anymore and the finish line is far off and we're about to go through the hard time. So for yourself, part of that is setting a manageable pace for yourself as a parent and all the roles you play, and also trying to talk to your kids and help them set a pace that's manageable. Help them set a pace that's going to allow them to make it through what's going to be an extended sheltering in place. And like for me, when I take my kids on a run in the morning, my little guy wants to sprint as fast as he can, but then he burns out and he can't finish the race. And so really trying to talk to him about how to go slow and steady and think about that in terms of work, educating your kids, your self-care, and all the roles you play. And then the next thing I wanted to kind of jump into is each week we do this, and we're going to continue, is to talk about trends we're seeing during the week. I'm going to talk about it from the viewpoint of the kids we're trying to help, and Amy's going to talk about it from the viewpoint of parents. And so what we're seeing, and this is kind of collecting from colleagues and friends, that overall it varies, and you can see a lot of variation by your age. And so elementary kids, if they have been enjoying the time off and enjoying time with parents and fun, they're still doing it. Some of us who are here have already started school. And if kids, and this is the thing with these asterisks, if they were good before, they're still good now. So if they liked school before this happened, the addition of school has created some normalcy and they're happy. If they like their family and are doing well, that's great. But if they're not, those are now also continued to be problems with the school coming back online. Where their grieving points are, they're missing friends and some of their activities. And their range of emotions, a lot of them are happy, content, they're getting bored, a little more clingy and needy, some attention seeking. And then you can see this kind of throughout in middle school, some of those same themes. But remember, if you're a middle schooler and you're in 8th grade, they're also going through more grief. They're not going back to school. They're not going to be the king or queen of the hill. They might not be able to say goodbye to their friends. And again, many of them are going to different schools and can't have that exit ending experience. So they're more bummed and they're missing their friends and activities and some events. And with them seeing a little more boredom, they're worried a little more about their parents. They might be a little extra sensitive, and they're, again, missing their friends. And then high schoolers and college students, they're having a little bit of a harder time, the ones I'm talking to. And again, there's a lot of loss at this time. Friends are such a big deal at this time and age for people, and they can't be with them, especially seniors, and a lot of loss. And I'm dealing with a lot of seniors now who who got into their colleges, but now they can't go visit to make sure and determine what schools they want to go to. And that's true for juniors. So kind of they're more emotionally on edge. They're more worried about their future. They are getting a little more stir crazy. And many of them are feeling this thing of where they're starting to feel over controlled by parents, especially college students who come back. They're feeling that. And a couple of the trends just to be aware of if you're a parent of a high schooler is one thing is what everyone's determining as social distancing. So I'm working with some high school students and they say the social distancing sucks. I can only see my boyfriend or girlfriend and my best friend, and it's really hard to social distance. And so they're not necessarily having the same definition. So you might want to talk to them about what that definition really is and why we're doing it. But many of these college students, especially some of the high schoolers, because of the time off and gap, are starting to get into some bad sleep rhythms, which might be a problem. And it might be something you want to talk to them about. So now we want to go back to one of the mindsets and themes, but remember, this is a time of tremendous stress. And if you think of stress like water in a dam, the job of us is at this time to really figure out how to get the water out of the dam. And so it's even more important now. And so before COVID, I would teach people about the idea that stress is like water in a dam. And what we have to do to get the water out is this three-step process. We have to tune in and try to figure what the water is about. We have to know what the water is, and then we have to have ways to get it out. And some of the ways you get it out is, first off, you have to determine the type of water you're dealing with. Is this some fixable issue? Is this something I can take care of? If it's a bill that I have to take care of or fix, that I have the money for, that's something fixable, and I have to figure out what to do. However, if it's a bill that you can't pay, that might be more unfixable, something you don't have as much control over. If a loved one is sick, if there's someone you care about that you can't really help, that's unfixable. And sometimes some of the stress and things we worry about are our anxiety and what I call overreactions. If we're worried about 8 or 9 months from now, what we're going to have for breakfast, that might be an overreaction to where we are at this time. So what we need to do is, after we figure out what kind of stress we're dealing with, anything that's fixable, we want to come up with game plans of how are we going to fix it? What are we going to do? It doesn't mean right away, but we want to get those things into a calendar. Unfixable issues, which are a lot of the things we're dealing with now, the way to deal and get the water out of the dam is to release it by getting support, talking about it, putting it into art, putting it into your workouts, putting it into something, finding ways to get it out. And next week, we're going to talk much more about anxiety and what we do if we recognize that some of the worries and stresses we have are really more our anxiety getting the best of us. And then, as you saw, part of the main ways we get the water out, but we also want to have some of these auxiliary valves that just are always kind of taking the pressure out of the dam. And so you can see a list of a whole bunch of things that help. And because we're entering into the hardest time and part of the hardest time of the marathon, I really want to challenge you all, and with your partner next to you, to turn to them and talk about one thing you could commit to doing to try to take more of the water out of the dam and keep that water level low. But because we're in such unprecedented times, I'm asking people to increase their check-ins. To, instead of it being once a day to check in on your water level, to at a minimum 2 to 3 times. And I'm going to ask you, when you check in on your water, kind of use the idea that 10 is the water's overflowing, 1 is no barely any water at all. And if you start to notice that your water is getting above a 6, to know that your ability to stay in control, to make healthy decisions, to talk right with your kids, it might start to be impacted. So we do want to, if you're above a 6, be mindful before you start talking and engaging with your kids. Use some of the tools in the auxiliary dam to get out the water, to make it more manageable, or go back to one of those more main valves to help get the water lower, to try to be in a better place when you deal with your colleagues, friends, kids, because the water is going to keep coming. And one of the things we know, sometimes just taking a time out can be a helpful way to let you do that. So it might be teaching your kids and family about the concept of taking a time out, because my water level is high, and I'll come back when it's lower and talk about it and deal with it. And then also trying to create dam release spaces for everyone in the family. So everyone's a little different, but making time, and part of what being a good partner in this, and we talked about the couples angle, might be, again, making sure each of you have ways to get water out and have some time to do it, and creating that space to make it manageable. And some kids I work with have created a room downstairs with a punching bag and things they can break, because that helps them. Other kids, it's more art, and they've created a little art room where they go into to release. So finding what works for you and your family and kids and having it. And a great way to teach kids about this is the movie Inside Out. It's a beautiful movie of water in the dam, and that is definitely a way to help teach this, and then talk to them about ways to get the water out and to take care of their emotions at this time. So when I ask everyone, adults, parents, kids, when I'm working with, I always ask them this question, and I'd like you to do the same thing. I'd like you to take a moment, and I'm going to say, listen to your dam. When you really close your eyes and kind of figure out deep down, what am I craving or needing at this time? And it will change over time from week to week, maybe even day to day. And when I ask people to do that, especially kids and teens, here are some of the main things I'm hearing at this time. There are many people who are feeling feeling stir crazy, feeling either bored, stir crazy, having a longing desire to escape. A lot of people are feeling alone, and many people are feeling Groundhog's Day, that everything is happening over and over again the same day. And again, when you figure out what you're craving, then the challenge for each of us, and including your kids, is to find and use our own creativity and find creative ways to take care of that need. Because we can't do it in our traditional ways, but we can find creative ways to recreate that. And a lot of the teams I'm working with who are dealing with Groundhog Day, we've just had conversations about how do we change it up even a little bit? How do we not let the same day happen over and over again, and introduce some of that? How do we change up stir crazy and these things? So, and the last part about the dam, and I'm going to say the things that might be signs that your dam is getting too high, and I'm going to call no bueno, is we all have stress habits, meaning things we might do when we're under a lot of stress and our water levels are higher. So that can be emotional eating, drinking a little more, smoking a little more. That can be biting your nails, picking, all these kind of stress habits. If you're noticing you're doing more of those, if you notice you're more irritable, and where the dam can really hit us is our ability to sleep and focus. And if you notice that that's getting harder to do at this time, go back to your dam management. Make sure you're doing things to get the water out. And then the one last concept I want to talk about today and do a little bit of a deeper dive is, remember I talked in the beginning about this notion of a skiing mindset. And here's what I mean by that. Now in kind of week 2.5, there are probably a bunch of behaviors that your kids are doing that are starting to get more on your nerves. Maybe bullying each other. I'm seeing a little more whining. Like refusal is the picture of some kid who's not eating their vegetables. Impulsivity, not being able to sit still, being slobs and messy. And again, we keep seeing these things over and over a day. And it's going to get on our nerves and increase that water in the dam. And if you start approaching it with skiing, again, we want to change it up. And what we typically are going to do when we see these things, we yell, we scream, we get angry, we just give in because it's easier. We sometimes might try to give a consequence, and we keep repeating these things. And that's what I call the slot machine effect. This is how Vegas was built. It's called intermittent reinforcement. When that behavior they do eventually gets them what they want. And if it works and it comes more sporadically, it actually increases the behavior. And so that's why your kids do a lot of these behaviors. So what we want to do as parents at this time is figure out a new way. And the first thing I want you to think about is picture a behavior right now that is getting on your nerves that one of your kids is doing. And ask yourself these questions. One, why is this behavior happening? What is it getting my child? What is it doing for my child? And then to think about, does my child know how to do a different, more desired behavior? And if you think about it, we know that we have to teach. We send our kids to school. We know we have to teach them English. We have to teach them math. But we don't think we have to teach them social emotional skills like how to not be impulsive, how not to whine, how to deal with their anxiety. And so think about, has my kid or anyone taught them how to do the behavior that I want to see? And then once they know this behavior, then we got to get them on the mountain. And has my child practice that behavior on the green slopes, on the bunny slopes? Do they start to feel confident? And then we know they got it when we've taken it to the next level and we start bringing it up the mountain. And that's what we want you to start thinking about when you're seeing these behaviors that are driving you bonkers at this time. So what we want you to do is, again, let's take a behavior and start to ski it. So again, think about the behavior. How can I teach them? And again, think you can buy a book, Amazon, Google, YouTube. You can talk to a therapist. After you know it and you've taught it, then what you want to do is start to ignore the old behavior and positively reinforce the new behavior. And this works great if you have other kids in the house who don't do that behavior. Give that other kid more praise for doing what you want to see. Like, Johnny, I love how you're taking turns right now. That's awesome. And ignore Matthew, who keeps cutting and doing things. And then try to create some fun, but tell them, we got to practice this skill, Johnny, of not cutting in line or not trying to always be first. And then play games around it. All right, let's play that game and let's practice. And then once they feel like they got it, then let's really take it on the mountain. And we're going to see this more next week when we talk about anxiety. But here's how this might look with a kid who's anxious about singing in public or doing presentations in public. So we taught them some of these anxiety skills that you're going to learn next week. And then we might, for a bunny slope, get them watching just singing fails on YouTube, to getting them to sing alone in the shower, to getting them to start singing happy birthday at dinner. And we keep working up to maybe where they're singing the national anthem at a big sporting event, or they're going online with all their friends and have to perform a concert to their family. So these are how we might start to tackle these behaviors. But again, if you don't start tackling them and teaching your kids, you're going to keep seeing them, and it's going to keep getting under your skin and driving you bonkers. The last thing then, based on the themes of this week, one of the things of smart parenting is learning to talk to your kids. So here are some of the things, again, want you to really focus on talking to them this week about. Again, talking to them about the virus itself. And that's where the Voldemort picture comes in. And we talked about last week. You got to talk about Voldemort. You got to help your kids understand it, because not talking about it doesn't help. It gives Voldemort more power. And what we want you to talk about is still, because there's so much lemons in this process, continue to make times for the lemons. Continue to give time to grieve. And then to also talk about how to make lemonade and what are some of the good things. Again, talk to them a little more about the marathon idea and how can we set a pace, especially with those about to start school. How do we set a pace that allows for school and some balance and managing some of these tough emotions? And then based on the trends we're seeing, I would encourage you to start talking to your kids about how to bring some spice into the day, how to make it a little more picante, and to not always have the same routine to break up that stir crazy Groundhog's Day thing we're feeling. And the last thing before I turn it over to my partner is what I've last talked about is this notion of checking in with your kids and get their opinion, because they're a key stakeholder in this on how you're doing. So below you can see a picture of my 3 kids, and you can see what I asked them for week 2. And I'm not so much thinking about the grades, but it's what they're telling us. And what they're telling us is what we did well and they liked because it was their spring break. They got more free time, less chores, they got to relax, and a little less structure. And they, especially my 12-year-old, valued that. I think she was trying to be funny, but what we could do better, she said we could let them have a little more dessert. Again, you can see a consistent theme, but you can see with my little kiddos, they're starting to message that they could use a little more time with mom and dad. And again, we're working hard trying to balance, and this is so hard for everyone. But these are things I'm trying to take note of and see what can I do this week to try to create a little more time with them based on checking in with them. So again, I would encourage you to do that at this time. You don't have to do grades, find your own way, but try to have a conversation about how it's going from their perspective, because that's what we're trying to do, is make this an experience that's tolerable and manageable for them, because they have been thrown in this marathon too, with no one asking them or letting them get out. And the last thing before I turn it over to my colleague, again, if you wouldn't mind typing in, I hope there are some things that were helpful. I'd love to hear. And what I'd love to hear based on this is maybe something you might stop doing based on today, something you might keep doing, pat yourself on the back. I'm glad I'm doing that as a parent. And maybe one thing you might start doing a little more based on our conversation. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Amy Lopez.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. Let me go ahead and I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint for all of you here. All right, so thanks to all of you guys. Thanks to Scott. I want to go ahead and first of all, just take a minute to take a breath and congratulate yourselves on doing okay. We made it through another week, and let's just be proud of ourselves. Every week, I think we just kind of need to acknowledge, like, we are still standing and we are still here. Some of the trends, as Scott mentioned, some of the trends that we're seeing, I'm looking more at what our patients are telling us and more from the parent perspective. So probably the biggest concern I heard this week that I'm actually going to address a little bit later is, how can I teach my kid and be a parent and do my work all at the same time. And there's just this overriding dilemma of, I don't know how I'm going to balance all these things and do all these things simultaneously and do any of them well. There's been a lot about personal anxieties. So my phrase this week has been, there's a difference between what is possible versus what is probable. And really thinking about, yes, it is possible that your mail could have coronavirus on it. Is it probable? To really come back and start to do some of those challenging pieces around, what's the likelihood this is going to happen to me? The thing I'm hearing a lot from parents too is that kids have decided this is not fun anymore. It used to be, it was kind of cool being home, and now it's not. And so the kids are becoming more anxious and more emotional. But then on a good side, we're having more people saying, you know what, but we're also figuring it out. We're finding our flow. We're figuring out our routine. I want to talk a little bit about this notion of trying to fit it in. That, like I said, that's been one of the biggest concerns I've heard kind of professionally and personally this week, whether it be from my patients or on Facebook, that they don't know how to do it all at the same time, to work, to parent, to live through a pandemic, and then do all of those other things that you think you're supposed to be doing as a parent. So I'm going to break it down, and I want to talk specifically about the teaching piece. Okay, the other stuff we may get to later, really balancing with your boss or working out the co-parenting, we're going to talk just about the home classroom. So first of all, I think one of the things all of us have realized this week is that teachers are awesome. We love you. Thank you. You are doing a fabulous job. Related to that, we can't all do your job. Keeping in mind that, again, where are your expectations? Are you expecting to teach your kids at the same level with the same strategies that the teachers do? Keep in mind that they have had years of training and practice and education around how to teach, whereas we know very little. We know nothing. Half the time, I have a 7-year-old, and half the time I don't know what she's talking about when she's like, which math strategy should I use? And I'm like, there are more than one. This is what I call the SpongeBob problem. And I say this because I was watching SpongeBob, but what else am I going to do, right? So SpongeBob was on, and the surgeon didn't show up for Squidward's surgery, so SpongeBob stepped in. Kind of ridiculous, but that's what we're asking ourselves to do, is to step into somebody else's job. So when SpongeBob got in the operating room, they offered him all of these options of which tool to use, and he only knows how to use a spatula. So he had to do surgery with a spatula. Keep in mind that you may not have all the tools. You may not have the skills, you may not have the tools, and you're not expected to. You are not expected to do surgery with a spatula. The other thing I want to talk about that's a little different is there's a difference between the parent-child relationship and the teacher-student relationship. And where this comes from, my parents are both educators, actually, and I took one of my mom's classes. And one time for a paper, for the student paper, they were interviewing her about who her most challenging students were. And it was me. And I was like, what? I am so super offended right now. But then I was like, but you know what? She's actually right. And part of it is because I didn't take her class seriously. I actually fell asleep in it. I didn't do the homework for it. I didn't study because I knew I could ask her later. And similarly, she said the same thing, that she had a hard time managing me as a student, not as a daughter. So there's a difference between teacher-student and parent-child. So again, coming back to, we can't expect to be your child's teacher. We can help them, we can guide them, we can sit with them, but we're probably not going to be their teacher. So coming back to say, then let's manage some of these expectations. So one of the things I've been telling parents is focus on the process, not the product. Really to say, this is about giving your kids something to do so they don't fall behind, but how much work they actually get done is not necessarily relevant, okay? You should do some schoolwork every day, but timing can be flexible. You don't have to say you have to sit at your desk, at your laptop for 2 hours before you get let up. That's not reasonable. but to say we are going to do something educational every day and then balance it out. The other thing to keep in mind is that education happens in lots of different ways. Cooking, art projects, science projects, independent reading, letting the kids pick and choose what it is they might like to study. So to say that learning doesn't have to be sitting at a laptop. There are lots of choices. The other thing I've heard, it was interesting that I've had some parents say, well, I can't teach them for 7 hours a day. Kids don't actually do 7 hours a day, even high schoolers, that they have recess, lunch, independent reading time, work alone time. Teachers are not lecturing to kids for 7 hours a day. I also want you to know I've talked to a lot of educators this week, and they are not expecting you to be teachers either. Basically, they want to give the kids something to do, provide support to you and the kids, and just do as best they can to prevent some backslide. But their expectations are low. They recognize that there are some kids who don't have laptops or Wi-Fi, or the family may have one laptop for 5 kids. And so, again, kind of what I said last week, coming back to keeping your expectations reasonable for you and the kids. But I also want to point out too that you may get a lot of pushback, you may get a lot of emotion, and it may not actually be about the schoolwork. Keep in mind that little kids especially are not great with being able to say, here's why I'm upset. It's easy to say, I hate math. It's harder to say, I'm really scared about what's going to happen in the future. So right now, as I said, the parents are reporting kids are more emotional. You know what? Let them be more emotional. That's A-okay. There's nothing wrong with letting them do that, and really to say, you know what, let's put the schoolwork on hold, let's go take a walk, let's do an art project, then we'll come back to it. Again, back to managing those expectations. We're all doing the best we can. Even if it doesn't feel like it's enough, there's not time for guilt right now. We don't have time for guilt. So let's just go ahead and put that on hold. All of us are trying to navigate this. None of us have been through a pandemic before. So we have to figure out how we're going to navigate it. I want to do a quick lesson from the dialectical behavior therapy, which is when people are so overwhelmed and so stressed out they can't do anything, this is one of the skills we offer them. It's a skill focused on managing our vulnerabilities and getting back to our basics. And it's a skill called ABC Please. And it's pretty straightforward. The A, accumulate positive emotions. Try and do something fun. This is building up your fun bank account. B, building mastery. This is everybody needs things in their life that make them feel competent and confident. What are your kids already good at? And can you let them do more of that? Similarly, that we can do small goals that lead to long goals. Your kids don't have to finish an entire project. They could do a day or a portion of it, or they could read one chapter, or they could read one page, and then building upon that. C is the cope ahead, which is basically how are you planning ahead for the tough times that are about to come. So if you know your kid hates math, to be like, you know what, we got math to do this afternoon. I know it's going to be hard. Let's plan out ahead of time before you're frustrated and I'm frustrated what we're going to do. How are we going to pace it? How are we going to plan it out? And then the other stuff, I think that Dr. Cypers talked a little bit, you know, keeping this routine of, are you caring for your physical body? Anybody remember the last day they showered, brushed their teeth? We lose track of all of that. So saying to your kids, every day I do want you to get up, I want you to brush your hair, brush your teeth, and put on a clean shirt. So really saying that, let's do a little bit of exercise, okay? Managing illnesses as they come up, being aware of the eating and trying to balance eating as best you can. A is avoid unhealthy coping skills, whatever those may be, which Dr. Cypers mentioned. Managing sleep as best you can to keep your kids on their same sleep routine. I know it's hard, and it's easy to let them sleep in till 10 o'clock in the morning because what else are you going to do anyway? But to say, again, especially if we're doing school, we want to keep this routine. And finally, to do some exercise. Okay? I want you also to think about, again, having this family plan. We talked about this last week of you communicating with your family. What will we do to care for ourselves and each other during this time? And how do we help each other out? So thinking for you, like Scott said, what do you need? What is your dam about to break? And how can we communicate to that to each other as a family? And as I said before, you guys got this. Keep encouraging each other. Keep reminding yourself we'll get through this. This will end eventually. All right. So we have something really cool and really special for you guys tonight, something a little bit different. Tonight we're going to offer some breakout rooms. So maybe you want a little more, you want to go into some of these topics a little bit deeper. So we have some options. If you're done for tonight and you don't need to go any further, great. Have a good night. We'll see you later. However, we have some other choices of ways that you can get some additional support or you can get some additional help. So we have some choices. So I'm going to be talking more about ADHD and the home classroom. We have Dr. Dana Steitman from our clinic who's going to talk about managing the couple relationship. We have our infant mental health specialist, Dr. Melissa Batt, who's going to talk about working with younger kids. We have Dr. Darren Norris from the Cohen Military Veterans Network, who's going to be talking about military first responders and frontline workers. And then Dr. Matt Mishkin will be answering all those questions about screen time. So here's the trick, is that we have to go to other rooms if you want these. So I'm going to pop off and go to my room. If you want general support and you just want to talk, Dr. Scott Cypers will be here. He'll remain in this meeting. However, if you want to join us in a different meeting, we'll see you in one of those Zoom rooms pretty quickly.
And folks, I kind of think of it as choose your own adventure. And so if you stay here with me, you're choosing the adventure. We'll talk and support each other. And if you go to the other rooms, and I'll show you the links here. So if you lost and you move quickly, you can see the other numbers and that you can click on to go to. So you would go to Zoom and you would say join a meeting and you would type in the numbers. So again, growing up, choosing your own adventure. Choose the adventure that best meets for you. We'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes to write it down and jump in over to the other links. And then I'm going to take it off and we'll do a little more sharing and supporting and general support over here for what's going on with you and your kids, your relationship, and just trying to help you at this time.